producer, also one of the founders of Delta Force, involved in the State Department and other agencies on counterterrorism and regime change. Everybody knows who he is, Dr. Steve Pieczenik, stevepieczenik.com. Dr. Steve Pieczenik, thanks for joining us to try to give us your take or your sources on what's happening.
Well, let's go back a few years, Alex. Years ago, I told you I was asked if I could be monitored from above. And I said, of course, I have no problem with it. You guys have been monitoring me for years. You didn't have to announce it. But I have no problem. I understand why you're doing it. I have no issue with it. You're not going to repress my speech, nor are you going to repress or suppress Alex Jones' speech or anybody else's speech. Let's get some historical facts in perspective before everybody starts to become unfolded here. First of all, the notion of suppressing and surveying American speech goes back to the times of FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the absolute greatest liberal president we've had, and a great president. He was told by both Congress and the Supreme Court, you cannot survey in any way the electronic emissions or signal intelligence that comes from the American public, i.e. the telephones or anything else. He said yes, but he ran all of them and basically had a covert surveillance of every American, and at the same time, this great liberal incarcerated American Germans, American Italians, and American Japanese. So the history of surveillance in this country goes back to the time of FDR. It increased when the National Security Agency came in 1948, 49. A bill was passed, and every American telephone wire literally went through the National Security Agency. So to think that we have not been surveyed or in any way monitored is absolutely both childish and absurd. In effect, we were in World War II, and then there was the Cold War, and rightfully or wrongfully, this was in place because this was the way you took care of the Republic. But they had this surveillance capability, which was not sanctioned by the Supreme Court or the Congress. This is distraction and denial. The real issues that are coming to the forefront is, once again, we have the neocons coming in. And what am I talking about? Right now, in front of the Judiciary Committee is Neil Gorsuch, a very decent man who looks like he's been perfect. His moral integrity seems above board, went to Harvard, summa cum laude, then had a PhD at Oxford. But then when I closely look at his record, I have a major problem with it. In a 14-month period during the time of 2005, when he worked directly for Attorney General Gonzalez, Gorsuch, initiated and enhanced several programs which were totally illegal and immoral. First was the enhancement of interrogation. Secondly was rendition. Thirdly was torture. He was key to the torture implementation and legitimacy of using torture against so-called terrorists. Now remember, this comes after 9/11. So what do we have here? We have a so-called decent Coloradan who tells you about how humble he is, but really he's quite bright. And at the same time, he goes to Georgetown Preparatory School, which happens to be a Jesuit school. I have nothing against Jesuits, but clearly he learns how to follow orders. And in this case, I must say, Dianne Feinstein, as much as I don't agree with her most of the time, was correct to press in on the key issue. Because the moral integrity of Neil Gorsuch does not lie in 48 years of his life. It lies in the 14 months that he was a co-conspirator with Bush, Cheney, and Wolfowitz, and Condoleezza Rice and Romney to implement Patriots Act, increased terrorism, and increased interrogation. That makes him an amoral man. From that point on, I have a question that this man cannot be a judge in the Supreme Court. Now, what is in fact happening? While you and I are talking about other issues, I'm still monitoring the rise and fall of the neocons. As you know, we were successful in stopping John Bolton from coming in as a key player in State Department. Yet today, he went into the White House. Whether Trump realizes this or not, or he understands what I'm saying, or a group of us who are saying, we're not dilettantes, we're not somebody who has an axe to grind, but there will be no neocons in the White House or in the State Department. Let me repeat it again so Trump and his team understands this. And Tillerson understands this. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're the CEO of a $500 billion corporation like Mobil Oil. You do not threaten North Korea under any condition because you have a moron like John Bolton, who's never been in military, who was afraid to join our military and publicly said, I was scared to get killed in the rice paddies of Vietnam. Right now, the Democrats are not relevant. The only thing they're relevant to do, and I'm going back to this point, they cannot have neoconservatives coming in. Dianne Feinstein is not dangerous. Nancy Pelosi is not dangerous. Michael Moore is not dangerous. They've all been neutralized. What happened is, thanks to you and the group and those of us who kept the revolution going, the neocons who've been cowards and deprecated you, me, and Trump snuck back in like a bunch of rats, and they're back in the White House. And instead of focusing on the neoconservative rise, which leads with Gorsuch, Bolton, Abrams, all of whom have no right to come back into the administration, they were cowards.
And then looking at what's happening with Korea, what's going on with China and the South China Sea?
The neocons want America to go to war. Excuse me. North Korea has 2.2 million men on the DMZ, on the demilitarized zone. We are 30 miles away from Seoul. If John Bolton has his way, he'd have no problem with taking preemptive action, whatever that means, because he's never been in the military, he has no strategy or tactics. And 2.2 million North Koreans will swarm over the DMZ and literally go in hours right into... Alex, remember, I've been in the business of nuclear deterrence. We took it down. We have the... North Korea is not interested in a bluff. North Korea couldn't care less about a sanction. What North Korea will do is what's best for North Korea. Our preparation has to do with the tactical and strategic issues of how to deal with North Korea with other countries. That's what both...
And you don't think the neocons have learned any lessons?
They've been destructive to the country. We're not addressing the issue of why, in fact, we're repeating what we had under the Bush-Cheney administration and the Obama.
Okay, well, why did neocons keep taking over then?
Because they're there, and they're able to be incredibly, like snakes or like rats. They're on the ship. I'm not around in Washington. You're not around in Washington. They're able to co-opt the Conservative Party. They're funded by Shelley Adelson, or they're funded by the Mercers, or whoever it is. They scurry away when it comes for time to come forth and do something that's morally right. They didn't support you. They didn't go after their own president. They weren't able to...
Why is he going to let people in that were his enemies in the campaign?
Because he has no other alternative. I don't know why he's choosing.
Well, what do you think of this claim that I'm getting directed by the GD Russians?
Well, it's absurd. You and I know that the Russians could care less, although they like you very much, and they happen to like me or fear me. It's not relevant. The fact that the Russians happen to be monitoring everybody, we're monitoring the Russians. What I'm getting to, again, we're getting into the self-destructive force where we got into that problem with Bush-Cheney. Trump has now congratulated Cheney for his support, and what we're getting is a president who we wanted up there and does not have judicious advice.
So Trump's starting to make mistakes.
That's correct. And what he needs are people like you or the people like myself who've been involved and were able to come out and able to take risks and able to create things. There's not one neocon who's ever served our country or built his own corporation. Yeah, the neocons were created by Commentary Magazine, a man by the name of John Podhoretz, who's the father-in-law of Elliott Abrams. It happens to be, unfortunately, a great amount of Jews who were Trotskyites and avowed communists. The only thing they really understood was that we had to have revolution at every point in the progression of history. They were not pro-Americans. They avoided the draft. They were very cowardly when it came to the draft. Yeah, they're Jewish Trotskyites. I mean, there's Zalmay Khalilzad, who's from Afghanistan. There's Steve Hadley, who's Christian. I mean, I can go down the whole list. The neocons want is a constant state of war and a military-industrial complex where the United States makes certain that Israel be the focal point in the Middle East. That didn't work. Where we would get rid of Saddam Hussein in Iraq. That didn't work.
So what do we do?
Well, what we did is, and unfortunately, I have to kind of step back a bit. We put in Michael Flynn, who was able to, in many ways, get rid of some of those neocons. But unfortunately, I have generals in the Secretary of Defense position, McMaster and elsewhere, who've accepted the notion that we can put soldiers into harm's way when we have no strategy. We have no strategy in Syria. We have no strategy in Iraq. And once again, we're in Afghanistan. It's the 15th year. I can go through the CIA right now and get you the people who created them, plus the neocons who are involved, plus the Mossad.
Okay, well, then how do you shut down ISIS?
It's easy. You reverse engineer how you created it. That was created by Al-Qaeda and ISIS. It was created by the CIA. I go to Tenet. I go to the guys who created it. I do the interrogation. Then I find out who was involved. I'll find out where the money track comes from in Saudi Arabia and Israel, Jordan, UAE, and Dubai. It's not hard. You don't fight an enemy that you don't need to fight and was created by us.
No, I agree. So, I mean, couldn't you put pressure on Saudi Arabia and Qatar and others?
Pressure, that's all nonsense. The pressure doesn't mean anything because Saudi Arabia is literally like our cousin. They can't get close enough. They're fearful of us. You don't go overseas when you can go home, and I can go right through the CIA and pull out every person who was involved, go right through the Saudi intelligence, go through Mossad, and I can get you every person involved in the neocons and 9/11 and put them on trial. That's not what's happening. In fact, what's happening is a repetition of the failures that occurred from 9/11 onward, and Trump now will be involved with that very issue. I don't care about Jared Kushner. He doesn't know what he's doing. Well, the problem is Trump has to have somebody around him with whom he feels secure, whether it's Ivanka or Jared Kushner.
He likes his family.
That's his family. That's not my problem. My problem is that Jared Kushner...
But as a psychiatrist, what does that say about Trump that he always wants family around?
Let's say, on the nicer edge, I can say he loves his family. On a more sophisticated level, I would say he needs those who he feels comfortable with in order to give himself a kind of psychological barrier to deal with strangers. Is that unusual? No. But let's start with one at a time. Gorsuch cannot be nominated for Supreme Court Justice. Let me put it this way. For many of the people in the audience, I would love them to see a film called Judgment at Nuremberg. But the Nuremberg trials were exactly about Judge Gorsuch. The question was asked by our prosecutors after the war, why were German Nazi judges who were very sane and normal and had huge degrees from America, Britain, and Germany able to initiate laws that were against the Jews, gays, whatever, and they were suppressed. And why were these decent people, and this judge is an extremely decent individual, but during a 14-month period, he cracked his decency and literally began to go into the fascist state. He thought it was good to initiate a suppression of freedom, a surveillance of what our normal freedoms are, increased, enhanced torture. He justified it. Went to Guantanamo, said this was the best thing he could have had. He wrote to the Council on Foreign Relations, and remember, I was there and then I left, that we should have a policy discussion on the need for torture. And so what happened during these 14 months was to reveal the underlying nature of this so-called decent American, who was not unlike many of the German judges who were decent German judges, but they followed orders. And the orders were to suppress American freedoms. He should have said, no, I'm a lawyer, but at this point, morality supersedes my job as a lawyer. He couldn't do that. And he didn't want to do that. And instead, he became this slimy, egregious individual, but very smooth. He had all the credentials he needed and worked his way through the conservative channels, through the Heritage Foundation, through the Federalist Foundation, until he looked as if he was cleaner than Macbeth's wife, when in fact, he was already morally compromised. When a man or a person is morally compromised, I don't care if they've been justified for 99 years. At that point, 9.1 years, they have a problem. Trump has never suppressed anybody's freedom. Trump has never invoked.
No, I agree. But you're saying this guy has.
This guy was not only suppressing, he was number 3 at the Justice Department, couldn't be better off, and couldn't thank Bush enough, Jr., that he was rewarded with a 10th Circuit Court in Colorado. Why Colorado? Because he came across with this bullshit narrative that he's one of the boys from Colorado, I'm 5th generation, when in fact he grew up in Washington, D.C. His mother was the first female director of the EPA. He went to a Tony boarding school, Georgetown Preparatory School, a Jesuit school, went to Columbia, did well, went to Harvard, did well, and then to kind of top off the topping on the cake, he went to Oxford and wrote some nonsensical thesis about why you don't have euthanasia and assisted suicide. This guy smells and reeks of the ability to slime his way up the political ladder. But at the moment of truth, at least with Cheney, I knew what Cheney was. He was a rat. He was a rat from day 1, and he was a rat from day 5, but he never changed his stripes. This guy, Gorsuch, was changing his stripes right and left, and then stood on a self-righteous step and said, what, me? I haven't done anything. I was just a lawyer. No, you were more than a lawyer. You were the perpetrator and the instigator and the facilitator of suppression of the state. That's called fascism. If it's fascism for a day, a week, or a year, that's still fascism. For that reason alone, he does not deserve to be Supreme Court Justice. There are many other conservative judges who
looks like it's going to get confirmed. The public needs to know when they're up there saying we're liars, there's no surveillance, we have to expose it.
Well, I just said it. We have surveillance. But the key issue is the public doesn't know. We've got 500 Marines being put into Syria in a war that can't be won, in a battle that was not even planned out correctly in Raqqa. We have another...
But I mean, Trump promised to knock them out. You don't think they can kill those guys?
He can't kill them. You don't kill so-called terrorists.
No, I get it. You turn off their command and control. What does Trump do then? You're saying you don't go militarily beat them. What do you do?
His generals, instead of having a meeting of 62 countries to find out how you go with ISIS, you sit down with McMaster, who knows better than this, and ask what the internal strategy is for taking apart the ISIS and how it came about through the Mossad.
Does Trump just get advice from his people? The generals follow orders and don't tell him stuff?
No, the generals give him the order. They tell him exactly what he wants to hear. He's not a strategist. He's never been in combat. But I'm trying to tell you, Alex, the generals have failed in doing what they're supposed to do. And the reason is very simple. They were there in the first Iraq war, they failed. In the second Iraq war, they failed. They haven't won a war. They've been in battles, but not wars.
So they're ready to fight wars and not ready to use intelligence to cut it off at the head.
You got it. You use... The basic premise of all wars is you win it by using the head, not by using guns.
I got it.
Put guns on the ground, particularly with the Marines, you got cannon fodder. I've got boys who just came back from Africa. They don't know what they were doing in Africa. They don't know why they were shooting at certain people. They don't know why we have troops in Eastern Africa.
I know. I understand. So you're saying it is literally just a defense contractor event.
Industrial complex again. We don't need $58 billion more in a budget that's already bloated to $600 billion. I have 888 generals and admirals, twice the amount I had in World War II. Yet in World War II, I won 2 wars with George Marshall and Eisenhower, and we never had as many generals.
All right. Dr. Pieczenik, always great to talk to you. Pieczenik.com. Thank you.